is my prayer, my humble plea. May the Lord be ever with me. There is no death, though eyes grow dim. There is no fear when I'm near to Him. I'll lean on Him forever, and He'll forsake me never. He will not fail me as long as my faith is strong. Whatever road I may walk alone, I'll walk with God. I'll take His hand. I'll talk with God. He'll understand. I'll pray to Him each day, to Him, and He'll hear the words that I say. His hand will guide my throne and rod, and I'll never walk alone while I walk with God.
Good morning, beloved ones. Turn to someone and tell them, I'm moving through. I'm moving through. I am moving through. Yes. I'm moving through. Well, as we all are aware, today we begin Holy Week. And this week, these 7 days, and 7 spiritually and metaphysically simply represents a time of completion. So even though it's a week, it's our time for completion. But Holy Week is such a powerful time spiritually, energetically, because there's energy moving and swarming. It's a powerful time psychologically as we unleash and move through certain challenges and situations. And it's a powerful time for us metaphysically. It is a time that symbolizes great transformation and transition through great highs and lows. Is there anybody here that is not experiencing some transition in their life? Some challenge in their life? It could be minor. It could be major, and that's okay because life is going to have its fair share of those experiences. So this is a season of transformation, of transition, of moving from one state of consciousness into another, from a lower vibration into a higher vibration, from a lower expression into a higher expression. And it's a week in which the story, the well-known story, there are 2 major stories in the scriptures that we focus on, and it is the story, of course, of the birth of the Christ and then the story of the transition and the unfolding of the Christ during the Easter season. And thank God we know how the story ends. Isn't it a blessing when you know how the story ends? It gives you a little bit more confidence that I can move through this experience because I know how the story ends. It ends in victory. It ends in triumph. It ends in the overcoming and the overshadowing of the challenges of life. But you know, even Jesus knew how the story was going to end. He too knew how it was going to end, and he knew what needed to be done by him in preparation to get him there, right? So I want to take a look at an incident that occurred at the start of Jesus' ministry, when he was just beginning his ministry. There was an incident that occurred. And I'm going to be reading from the book of John, chapter 2. Now, in chapter 1 of John, Jesus had just called his disciples to him. He was beginning, and so he was getting his major support, his ministerial support team together. And so he had just called the disciples in chapter 1. And in the beginning of chapter 2, he has just performed his very first miracle, right? His very first miracle. But he performed it under protest because he told his mother that his time had not yet come. But you know, mothers can be sort of insistent. Now, not my mother. But mothers can be insistent, and she wanted him to do something about the shortage of wine at this wedding. They were at a wedding in Canaan, and there was a shortage of wine, and she wanted him to do something about it, even if his time had not yet come. And so we know exactly what he did with the shortage of wine, right? He turned the water into wine. So that's a great symbol of transformation, of taking one symbol, one position, and creating another, a finer one. Water and wine both symbolize life at some level, right? Water, of course, is initially what we need to sustain ourselves, okay? But wine is when we're moving to a higher level of life expression. It's something that's a little deeper. So he begins his ministry with transformation, moving water into wine. Now, I want to share what he does next after leaving the wedding in Canaan. And I'm reading again from John chapter 2. And it just says, this miraculous sign at Canaan in Galilee was Jesus' first display of his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After the wedding, he went to Capernaum for a few days with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples. It says it was time for the annual Passover celebration, and Jesus went to Jerusalem. And in the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. And he saw money changers behind their counters. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. He drove out the sheep and the oxen. He scattered the money changers' coins all over the floor, and he turned over their tables. Then, going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Don't turn my Father's house into a marketplace." Then his disciples remembered the prophecy, saying, "Passion for God's house burns within me." "What right do you have to do these things?" the Jewish leaders demanded. "If you have this authority from God, show us a miraculous sign and prove it." "All right," Jesus said. "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." "What?" they exclaimed. "It took 46 years to build this temple, and you can do it in 3 days?" But by this temple, Jesus meant his body. And after he was raised from the dead, the disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed both in Jesus and the scriptures. And I wasn't going to read this particular portion, but the chapter ends with this. It says, "Because of the miraculous signs he did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many people were convinced that he was indeed the Messiah. But Jesus didn't trust them because he knew what people were really like. No one needed to tell him about human nature." I read that because this little notion about Jesus knowing what people are like and what human nature is like is going to play into his story at the end of his journey, right? And so what I find fascinating is that he knew at the start of his ministry that he was going to raise his temple up. That's what he says. This is at the very beginning. That he was going to raise his temple up in 3 days after his crucifixion. But he starts his ministry off with literally clearing out the temple, right? The temple in Jerusalem. That's how he begins. And to some, it may look like he was just having a fit, right? Because it said he overturned some tables. He took all the coins and threw them on the floor, right, of the money changers. He put all the animals out. He said, "Look, don't turn my Father's house into a marketplace." Now, the temple played such an integral part in the lives of the Israelites. All right? It was so key to their ability to have a place to worship even. Because if you recall, hundreds of years before the advent of Jesus, the Israelites were wandering around trying to find a place to call home, a spiritual place. And they didn't have a place where they could worship God. They used to carry God around in the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulders, right? In a box. Now, let's forget the theology of all that, but the symbolism is they had to carry God around in a box because they didn't have a place that they could call or go to where they could worship or where they could perform their sacred rituals. And in that day and age, their rituals were very much a part of who they were. It was important for them, but they had no place. Not to mention that they had been exiled several times from Jerusalem and kicked out and had no home. So this is an important part for Jesus because he wants to start off clean. He wants the outer temple to match the inner temple. He wants his outer temple, his what? His body, to match what was taking place within his inner temple. And he wanted the outer temple, the physical symbol of the temple in Jerusalem, to match its divine purpose as well. Because he knew that he needed to be in alignment with his inner and outer sense of being if he was going to raise the temple up in 3 days. So he starts this process of his ministry by cleaning up and clearing out everything in the temple. Now let's fast forward 3 years, because that's how long Jesus' ministry lasted. It was only 3 years, a very short time, okay? And 3 years later, we are now at the end of his ministry. And here I'm reading from the book of Mark, chapter 11, verses 1 through 11, and then I'm skipping to 15 and 19. And I'm reading from Mark chapter 11. This is now at the end. As Jesus and his disciples approached Jerusalem, they came to the towns of Bethphage and Bethany on the Mount of Olives. Jesus sent two of them ahead and said, "Go into that village over there," he told them, "and as soon as you enter it, you will see a colt tied there that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you what you're doing, just say, 'The Lord needs it and will return it soon.'" The two disciples left and found the colt standing in the street, tied outside a house. As they were untying it, some bystanders demanded, "What are you doing untying that colt?" And they said what Jesus told them to say, and they were permitted to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their garments over it, and he sat on it. And many in the crowd began to spread their coats on the road ahead of Jesus. And others cut leafy branches and palms in the field, and they spread them along the road. He was in the center of the procession, and the crowds were all around him shouting, "Praise God! Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Bless the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Praise God in the highest heavens." Or hallelujah. So Jesus came to Jerusalem and went into the temple. He looked around carefully at everything. Then he left because it was late in the afternoon. Then he went out to Bethany with the 12 disciples. When they arrived back in Jerusalem the next morning, Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out the merchants and their customers. He knocked over the tables of the money changers and the stalls of those selling doves, and he stopped everyone from bringing in merchandise. He taught them, "The scriptures declare, 'My temple will be called a place of prayer for all nations,' but you have turned it into a den of thieves." When the leading priests and teachers of religious law heard what Jesus had done, they began planning how to kill him. But they were afraid of him because the people were so enthusiastic about Jesus' teachings. And that evening, Jesus and the disciples left the city. So they were bringing him praises and shouts of adoration and how they believed in him. Now, these are the very same people at the beginning of his ministry that were also, acknowledging him. And he said, I kind of know what's going to happen here, and I know how people work. I know human nature, because the same ones that laud you coming up will help bring you down. He understood that. And it's all right, it's part of human nature. But we're working on what? Spiritual nature, spiritual consciousness. We're trying to overcome our human dynamics and our human energy. Because if we rely on human nature, we're going to be in a whole heap of trouble. And he understood that. The process that we're working with is how to overcome human nature and supplant it with our spiritual understanding, our spiritual nature, which is vastly different from human nature. We're not doing things the way the world does it. We're not going to do things the way it shows up out here. And it might be a good model, but it's not our model. It's a different thing when you come from a place of spirit. And we have to remember that as well. Because sometimes we want to grab hold of what's familiar to us and the way everybody else is working and operating, and that's not the path that we are to travel on. And so at the beginning, I find this just so fascinating because he enters in with all these cheers, and the very first thing that he does is he goes into the temple. And he just looks around. He doesn't do anything when he gets there. He looks around until the next day and the next morning, because he says, I know what I'm going to get ready to do. The next morning he goes and he does what? He clears that temple out once again, driving out the merchants and the customers and the money changers and all that. And he tells them, look, my temple will be called a place of prayer for all nations, but you have turned it into a den of thieves. Now, why I find this so fascinating is at the beginning of his ministry, he does what? Clears out the temple. And at the very end of his ministry, he does what? He clears out the temple. Now, obviously, his actions and his reasons for doing so went totally over the head of the Israelites, right? It went totally over the head of the people, because 3 years later, they're doing the very same thing. They didn't get any of it, right? So that's what happens. But I want to look at this metaphysically, because I think it's very important. It must be important. The fact that he did it at the beginning and the fact that he did it at the end says to me there's something important about the process, so that we need to look at. And not only does he do it at the end of his ministry, but he's doing it at the end of his impending life experience on the planet. Okay? He takes the time because he knows this is going to be my last hurrah. Now, the temple, of course, is a symbol of a certain level of consciousness. In fact, as metaphysicians, we know that a house or any structure is symbolic or representative of consciousness. And the level of the quality of the structure determines and gives us an indication of the level of consciousness. If you're in a hut or a tent, that's a certain vibration. If you're in a palace, that's another vibration. So we know that this temple is talking about a certain level of consciousness. And because it's a temple, it's a consciousness that is sacred. It's a consciousness that has some spiritual quality to it, right? And the temple, we have to note, is also located in Jerusalem, which metaphysically simply means a city of peace. So what we can tell is that we're looking to establish a consciousness of peace at a certain level. Right? Now, this must be important to have a consciousness of peace, whether you're just beginning, whether you're just beginning a project or a ministry or an endeavor, it's important to have a consciousness of peace. Or if you're at a place where you're about to face a challenging situation, a trying circumstance, you still want to have a consciousness of what? Of peace. You still want to have a spiritual perspective on things that's needed at the beginning or the end, at the beginning of a project or an endeavor or through a challenging situation. Whichever the case may be, it is important for us to understand, and it's vital to have a consciousness of peace, to have a spiritual perspective, a spiritual level of consciousness. Oh, so important. So what this means is that one needs to get one's house in order. Whether you're beginning something or ending something, you need to get your house in order, your consciousness in order. You need to have it cleared out and cleaned out of those things that do not serve you well. If you're just beginning a project, you got to get it in order. Get your vision clear. All the doubts and the this and the that, the nays, get all that stuff out. Because imagine, if you're trying to start a new project and you got naysayers in your ear, that's not going to work. And the naysayers are not necessarily, there may be some outer naysayers. There's always going to be, what do the young people say, haters, there's always going to be outer naysayers. But I'm talking about the inner naysayers that dwell in your head and your consciousness. You can't do this, it's not possible, blah, 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 all that chatter. You got to get that, clean that out if you're beginning something. And likewise, if you're facing something, if you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, be it illness, or some great challenge, you need to get your house in order. Your consciousness needs to be right for you to be able to walk through that valley of the shadow of death. So this is so important for us to understand how to do these two experiences. But the fact that Jesus does it at the beginning and the end, and he has to do it twice, he has to clean it out twice, tells me something. It tells me that this whole process of getting your house in order is indeed what? A process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It may take you, I'm sure that it could have taken him 3 more times, 4 more times. How many times do you have to forgive? 7 times 70. How many times do I have to work? You got to keep doing it. It's not an easy, and that's what I have to memorize. Sometimes I get frustrated. Lord, I just, I've been doing this, and I got to explain this again? I got to come back around here again? Yes, because it is a what? Process. Turn to somebody and say, it's a process. It's a process. It is a process. Now, sometimes things that you think you have healed, issues that you thought you had pretty much resolved, might pop up again and raise their ugly head once again. But you see, the more they do it, I'm starting to catch on to it, though. I'm starting to say, you know what? I know what I see what this is. I got this. I see what this is. This is just simply part of the process, right? Okay. This is just something that I have to, is trying to challenge and cause me to look at how much I've grown from the last time it occurred, from the last time it popped up. Now, I've been doing some pretty intense inner work lately because I'm committed to that. And I've just been working at a certain level of consciousness and trying to really go to another level consciously. And I've been looking at things that I really need to look at, and things that, that I really need to see about me. And I need to work them through, and I need to heal them, and I need to process them, and I need to be present to them so that I can overcome them, right? And I've been doing the trace it, face it, erase it, and replace it activity that we talked about last week. And so I've been doing that, and all sorts of things, because I've made this commitment. You have to be careful what you pray for. You got to be careful what you declare, because the universe will give you the opportunity to experience it. So I've been working, and that's okay. And it's been a challenging journey inwardly for me. But I'm committed to stay with it. I'm committed to have this inner transformation. So these sorts of things have been coming up, and experiences that I thought I'd healed before. But what I know in this process is that I am about to have a breakthrough. I feel it in my bones. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes it has been feeling like I'm having a breakdown. Okay? Because it's tough, it's rough, and I've been praying more than ever before to get me through this, help me to work it through and see it through. And so sometimes before you get the breakthrough, it feels like a breakdown. You're walking through something that's just heavy. It's the shadow of the valley, of the shadow of death, the shadow of something heavy. But all of a sudden, if you can remember that it's just preparation, that breakdown is simply preparation for your breakthrough. It's preparation. So somebody say preparation. It's just preparation, you see, because growth oftentimes comes in the form of challenges, just to test your mettle, just to see how far you have come. But it's preparation. And Jesus was preparing for his great transformation, and clearing out of the temple was just what was needed for the foundation of clearing out his consciousness of anything and everything that might stand in the way of his ability to be triumphant in the raising of his physical temple to its spiritual expression. And all that was going to take place, it was preparation for him. So the question for us is, anybody feel like you're being prepared right now? Yes, it's preparation. So the question is, what do you need to clear out of your temple? What do you need to clear out of your consciousness? Jesus said to them, you have made it a den of thieves. So the question then is, what is robbing you of your joy? What is stealing your peace? Because if you have an experience of suffering internally, then something is robbing you of your joy and stealing your peace. And we need to be able to look at that. Or have you made your consciousness a marketplace? A place where, you find yourself bargaining with God. Well, if you do this, then I'll do that, or whatever. A marketplace where you are making deals, where you are setting up false promises, right? False promises, not keeping your word, not only to others, but not even to yourself. All right? So are you out of alignment? Are you out of integrity with your own heart and soul, your own dwelling place, your own consciousness, your own temple of being? Are you not living your truth? Are you not necessarily living your purpose, or not even clear of your purpose? It's time for us to stop saying we don't know what our purpose is. Your purpose is to bring forth the presence of God in every activity, in every situation. Your purpose is to be a light. That's your purpose. And if you're going to experience victory and triumph over these challenges of life, you then have to understand the statement that Jesus made when he said, look, in the world you will have trials and tribulations, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. Now, he was not just talking about the outer world, because he had not yet resurrected or ascended when he made that statement. But he indeed was talking about overcoming his inner world, overcoming whatever it needs, whether he was 40 days in the wilderness, overcoming, the temptations of the egoic mind, or some say the devil, whatever, but we say the egoic mind, or whether it was coming through the process of all that he had to go through in this Holy Week. And he had overcome all that first where? In consciousness. See, so he said, look, he had to get his own house in order. His consciousness was clear that he could then be able to meet and face whatever was coming up for him. His ultimate overcoming, his ultimate expression, the ultimate test of life, overcoming death. Now, I'm so glad that we are not being called to have a physical experience of pain and suffering. We don't. Thank goodness we don't have to necessarily be nailed to a physical cross. But I do believe that this process is very deep, and it is a symbolic one, that we are being called to gain an inner strength of spirit, that we are being called to gain a purity of spirit, a purity of heart and soul and mind and consciousness, in order to make our great overcomings and our shifts and experience transformation and all of these other inner processes. If we're going to be light bearers, if we're going to do a mighty work in spirit, if we're going to be spiritual masters and teachers, and if we're going to take our rightful place as children of the Most High God, we have to do this inner work, because it all starts with making an internal shift, with being transformed from within and in consciousness. And that, my friends, takes a lot of work. And most of us aren't really willing to do it. We do it here and there. But I must say, since I have taken on this endeavor to really have this inner shift, to really embrace and embody my spiritual awakening and the processes that I've been going through, I have noticed a change. Because even though the challenges come, I'm noticing I'm not staying in it as long as I used to. I'm noticing that while it has some effect, but it's not as deep as it used to be. That there's some space that I find within my being, some graciousness to be able to breathe through the process, to be able to stand back, and now I can look at it a little bit and I can see it happening. That's a change, that's a shift in my consciousness. And so this morning I was giving thanks for that. I said, don't have to be great. I'm not walking on water yet, but that's all right. And that's okay. The little shifts that I see in my being is good enough for me. I'm so happy because, I'm feeling that. I'm like, okay, this work that I'm doing has some great rewards. It's starting to take place in me. And so, this is what we're doing. We're doing being dedicated and committed, the work that we have to do in consciousness. And it's not easy. I'm not going to sit up here and say it's easy. It takes challenge. It takes commitment. It takes intensive looking. And you can't keep looking away. You got to look within. But it's so powerful. So you don't have to worry about where you should start. Just start. And you don't have to worry about what to work on, because whatever issues are up for you, that's what you work on. Whatever issue is present before you, you work on that. And whatever's blocking your joy, that's a hint, right? Wherever you have inner conflict, that's a hint. Start there, look there, and don't worry about anything else. And let me give you a hint. It's never about another person. It's never about the situation, okay? It's always about your perception of the situation. It's always about that, so start there. Because what happens is we are on a journey to clean up and to clear out this temple, this place where we want to dwell in peace. Don't you want to dwell in Jerusalem? You know, we've got to clean it up and clean it out. This is the start of Holy Week. Why not make a commitment to experience your own holiness, your own wholeness, right? By committing to getting your house in order, doing that which you need to do. Don't worry about the ups and the downs. Don't fear all of that stuff, because we already know that cleaning up and clearing out consciousness is not necessarily easy, but the rewards are going to be so great because you will be preparing yourself for triumph. You are preparing yourself for victory. You are preparing yourself for this journey into triumph. So, I, for one, want to offer anyone who is bold enough to take on this inner journey, I want to offer you some loud hosannas. I'm going to offer you some loud hallelujahs. I offer you some deep praises as you walk this journey, as you ride along the road of life. I offer all that. I applaud you. I stand up and I praise you, because I know that as I do so, you will be strengthened in the Spirit of God to continue on the journey and to push through the valley of the shadow of death, and you will come up victorious. Are you ready for the journey? Turn to someone and tell them, I'm ready. I'm ready for the journey. Hosanna and blessed be he who comes in the name and nature of the Lord. Victory shall be yours. Namaste and blessings. Victory. Namaste. Thank you.